but a significant number of people categorized by the experiences that we've had in the last few weeks. Persons who are of a certain age, the elderly, persons who have underlying health issues of a variety that's been described, and of course, those categories for them, it could be a question of life or death. We have seen examples, like for example in Italy, where one day you had 4 or 5 people, the next week you had a dozen, and then by the end of the month, you were dealing with hundreds of dead people. And of course, there are large populations, like the United States, which are now coming to grips with the fact that this situation is very serious from a scientific standpoint, from a numbers standpoint, from an economic standpoint. And from this very podium, I mentioned to you in my first discourse on this matter that the real threat, other than the health threat that we will be facing because of our presence and dependence on the international marketplace, the real threat of economic challenges which may be new and in some cases hopefully not insurmountable, but those situations are with us now. That being so, in this crisis, in this emergency, we have some strengths and we have some weaknesses, many weaknesses. We cannot confront this crisis from the standpoint of our weaknesses. We'll have to confront it from the standpoint of our strengths, whatever they might be. The question, the difference between this crisis and the banking crisis that we experienced in 2008, the collapse of Wall Street, was that that crisis could easily and was fixed by just putting money in the system, government bailout, and once the money was put in the system, everything was fixed after that. The companies came back, the banks came back, the industry came back, and they paid their debt to the government. And this problem that we are facing here, by its nature, is a societal problem. Inconvenience. And that is the policy against which the decisions that we are going to take in the next 48 and 72 hours will determine how we respond in this emergency. We have been engaged in seeking to exclude the virus from our country, and now to contain our healthy people in such a way that the virus does not move from person to person. The protocols that you would have been encouraged to participate in are the ones that the Ministry of Health will talk to you about when they speak to you this morning. To do this in the wider context, we have to isolate ourselves from a supply of the virus, from a source from outside of Trinidad and Tobago. Insofar as the virus is within us, within our country, the spatial protocols of how close you get to people and what contact you have with people, that is how we'll be responding at the personal level. But at the national level, spatial protocols of how close you get to people and what contact you have with people, that is how we'll be responding at the personal level. But at the national level, the Cabinet met this morning and is taking the decision that essential persons who we need would have to come in, and therefore such persons would be exempt. Other than that, we are basically disconnecting ourselves from the international community for the next 14 days. This decision will have far-reaching consequences for our national airline, which incidentally has been doing quite well. For 2018, CAL turned around its business and was reporting tens of millions of dollars in profit for 2018. I think it was 54 million. And on Saturday, I was scheduled to speak at a function where CAL was going to report its performance for 2019, which was quite significant. I think the figure they were about to report was $124 million in profit. But now, in a matter of weeks, the business of CAL and the future of CAL is now a matter for the corporation's soul, and we will do what we have to do at the company and at the level of the government to ensure that when this is over, that we still have an airline and we still have our staff who can continue to supply us with connections to the outside world. But for the next 14 days, we are required to shut down that operation except for nationals of Trinidad and Tobago. We at the government accept full responsibility for this country's affairs, and we are expecting that our activities, our actions, our decisions would be made in collaboration with and in support of and with the business community and labor. And I will mention in a moment how we're going to continue doing that as we go ahead. We've mentioned through a committee that was put in place last Thursday, chaired by Minister Baptiste Primus, how we'll treat with this question of extended leave. So now we've added pandemic leave, not to be abused, but as a condition of being away from the workplace, to be noticed as such, and to have the protection of the organizations that you belong. And of course, any extended leave should only be considered after utilizing the normal sick leave that's available and other leaves, but that will be spoken about in a little while about that. Now, as I said, we have some strengths. One of the strengths that we have is our Heritage and Stabilization Fund. That is what we loosely call our rainy day fund. There are dark clouds with us, and of course, if this is not a rainy day, I don't know what is. because we are threatened in a very serious way, and how we use the resources of this fund will be a matter that will be spoken about in the very near future. We also have been managing our affairs. The Minister of Finance will join us in a little while to point out to you how we have been going and where we are going now as a result of this surprise intervention. But we were measuring our performance on the basis of how much reserves we have for how many months of purchase. 6 months, 7 months, 7 months. That yardstick is now not just an academic yardstick. Those reserves are required to keep us alive, because we will have to intervene to ensure that, notwithstanding whatever else we become or whatever else we do, that there's food and pharmaceuticals in Trinidad and Tobago, because we have had to reassess our priorities, and we will have to keep assessing and reassessing our priorities. But as of now, given COVID-19, preservation of health and life in Trinidad and Tobago is priority number 1. To do that, we would have to ensure that in this time of crisis and emergency, that there's preservation of cash and liquidity in our economic system. To ensure that we do not, let me put it the other way around, to ensure that we do what has to be done to give us what is required to keep our economy going. We will want to do things that in themselves will not become the problem. And that is why the Cabinet today agreed that a certain number of committees that we had in the pipeline will now be activated to treat with our business in such a way that the necessaries will be available to ensure that we are responding in the best and most effective way. So, while as Prime Minister, I have full responsibility for the Cabinet as primus inter pares, I today have taken chairmanship of a subcommittee of the Cabinet on finance, banking and insurance. And that committee will include the Minister of Finance, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Alleyne West, Minister of Public Utilities, a former banker, Minister Robert Lee Hunt, and we will co-opt into that committee businessman and chairman of CAL, Mr. Ronnie Mohammed, Mr. Christian Mute, a former chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, and Karen Dabesi, managing director of FCB. And we will co-opt further persons who have expertise and who are willing to act in the public interest as we, within the next 48 to 72 hours, make the specific decisions about how we manage and use our financial strengths and cope with our weaknesses in that area. This committee is to report to me by 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, when certain specific decisions would be made. And those decisions will have to do with matters of, it will involve the central bank as well, through the Minister of Finance. The whole question of availability of funding and finance in the country. So the reserve requirement and the extras on that, interest rates, deferrals, and so on. Those are the things that will come out of this committee, and you will be advised as to what we are going to do specifically to treat with the consequences of the actions that we are taking to keep the virus out. Because the actions that we are taking will have far-reaching knock-on consequences. And what I'm saying to you here is that in recognition of that, the government example, Cabinet took a decision today that all bars will remain closed. Persons operating bars where people gather to drink and socialize, because our objective is to deny the virus connections from person to person. We are instructing that gatherings beyond 25 be avoided at all costs except under unavoidable circumstances. And insofar as we are still functioning as a country, going to work and doing things, that we observe the space between individuals, because the objective, the singular objective, is to prevent the virus from moving from one person to another. So we have the spatial considerations, and we also have, most importantly, the personal hygiene and personal responsibility conditions, where we can't tell you too often and too firmly that your personal conduct is a major part in the success or failure of these efforts. And the doctors will tell you about that, I'll remind you about that later on. But there are specific actions that the government will have to take. Some of those actions will run counter to what we have been trying to do for the last 4 years under this government. But this situation calls for us to do those things so as to give us an opportunity to be like those countries that have taken these actions and are in fact on the best place of the curve in treating with this still largely unknown invader of our person and our country. A second committee has been put in place, chaired by Minister Paula Gopi-Schoon, to deal with and interact with business and manufacturing, and that committee also includes co-opt people to deal with how are these actions and how is this virus going to impact. Paula Gopi-Schoon, Clarence Chamberat, and Winston, and who they'll co-opt in there. Because the actions that we are having to take are going to have impacts, not all of it positive, much of it negative, on job preservation, at least in the short term, and job sustenance for those who are going to lose opportunities. The government accepts a role in helping those persons to get over this, what we hope is a not too protracted period of emergency. A third committee, chaired by Minister Robinson Regis, a social support and job preservation committee. That committee will have Camille Robinson Regis, Jennifer Bettis Primus, Minister Webster Roy, and Minister Sananan as well. And that committee will be charged with determining how the lower income persons who are dependent on the social support system are to be affected or being affected by our actions and by the presence of the virus, and what the government and the national community can do and must do to ensure that those persons are not left in a situation where they are not sustained. Immediately you can understand what I'm talking about. We're going to have to provide additional food card support to families. We are going to have to provide some element of cash help to those persons who have the school feeding program. We're going to have to continue it and find a way to get the output from the school feeding program to those children who are in fact relying on that program for their one main meal of the day. So this committee will work on that and similar kinds of interventions. And of course, the Minister of Education will chair a committee to deal with our nation's block of young people who are of school age and the matter of in places of learning. And while I'm here, I want to mention that schools and places of learning will remain closed until the beginning of term 3, which is scheduled to begin on April 20th. When I spoke about the closure of school for a week, I said, in the first instance, I am now returning to that issue, and as part of our national response, the schools will remain closed until the 20th of April. In the meantime, all available opportunities for homeschooling, for online learning and training should continue, because we are not stopping our existence. We are simply responding to a challenge. And everywhere there is an opportunity to do things differently for the benefit, we should do it. And that's for children who are home, parents who are able to help children with their schoolwork, those who are able to, you do that, members of family. And while you do that, families, take particular care of your elderly, because they are the most vulnerable. And infection and cross-infection and whatever else, your personal responsibility is paramount here to protect those. And of course, I have heard that there are some private schools who believe that they are beyond these guidelines and instructions and may want to carry out their school program. I am here appealing to such persons to join the national effort by closing your operations, because this is not about your school and your ability to be better and do better than the rest of us. It's about not having gatherings. Doesn't matter how prominent your school is. The virus does not respect you because your school is your school. We don't want gatherings, because it is in those gatherings that the potential will exist for the virus to leap from one person to another and bring the whole country to a place where we could find ourselves like some other countries right now, where the level of infection is such that it overwhelms the health system, and then we know where barley grow. That is what we have to avoid at all costs. If we are able to provide health support to those who are infected as they may be, we will cope. The real danger is if we are skylarking, we are not cooperating, and we get a level of national infection which overwhelms the health system. And having said that, priority number one at the personal level with respect to employees and those who are responding, first responders, are our health caregivers. Because if they come down, doctors and nurses and the technical staff that work with them, if they come down, then all the rest of us are in a much more vulnerable position, and the help that we need, we will not get. So we are ensuring that our health caregivers, as I said earlier on, health is number one priority. Number 1A are the first responders in the health system. And as long as we are able to cope with the numbers, then we will be on track to overcoming this virus. If the numbers overcome us because we have been irresponsible or for whatever reason, we then will be in a far worse situation, which is called the worst case scenario. And that we also, if we require legislation of any kind to treat with any of these developments, that will be detailed as we go forward. The Attorney General's office is on standby, and immediately we can talk about one that has to happen. If we are to draw down from the stabilization fund, you know how that works. You have to wait until the end of the year to see what the outturn of the budget was, to be able to access the funding. We can't do that. We don't have time. We're in a crisis, and the crisis calls for that reserve to be used now. And therefore the AG's office and the Minister of Finance will have to act now to make sure that that aspect of strength comes in at the earliest opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, basically what we are talking about is going as far down as saying to the banks, we are all in this together. That togetherness is what's going to make this task doable, if not easy. And we're talking here about sharing the burden. The government, in taking all the responsibilities that I pointed to here, will have serious burdens. But it can't be normal for everybody else, other aspects of it, because let's face it, the government is simply a custodian of the resources of the population. So I've indicated to you where the government will go in using what you have, what strengths you have. But in the private sector, there will be opportunities and requirements. For example, in the banking sector, in the banking committee that I am going to chair, we're going to ask the banks to do a number of things. But there will be consequences to what we're asking them to do. We will ask them to make deferrals on some aspects of payment for those persons who are unable to pay as a result of the virus. Not forgiveness, just deferrals. So persons who can pay, the deferral is not going to help you. You continue to pay. But for those who are not able to pay because of the circumstance of the emergency, we will want to ask for deferrals. We also will want to ask the banks, if in an emergency, credit card interest has to be the same. Persons who are tenants and have landlords, I don't think your landlord is going to put you on the street to borrow, because the landlord values you as a tenant. But if you've lost your job, and we are saying that this thing could go on for another 12 weeks, another 3 months, we're asking landlords to forbear with tenants. But tenants who can pay, pay, because you're not going to get a writing off of your debt, a deferral, because in the period of emergency, and the experts are telling us that we could be in this situation going into June, and the effects, the immediate effects, could take us down to October. In other words, the planning that we are executing now in this government, in this country, our first horizon is the school year term 3 to start on April 20th, if we are able to. But we're looking at June. That's what, 10 weeks from now? And then the next horizon, October, as we talk to the central bank, the Minister of Finance, the banking community, the insurance, because they have inputs to give us. They have things that they can do and will do. I spent the whole weekend from Friday till this morning talking to the people who are having their hands on the levers of our economy. And there are things that they can do and will do. And at this point, I want to thank the restaurant owners who have heard, some of them already have indicated that they are prepared to provide some aspects of their businesses in terms of providing meals for the neediest in our society. This is a good sign that there are good things that can come if we are all accepting that we are all in this together. One other thing I want to say before I take my seat among my colleagues here. I was very disappointed to hear that, notwithstanding all the entreaties that have been made by government officials, by the technicians from the Ministry of Health trying to explain to you in simple language what we're dealing with, that certain people who run places of worship decided to do exactly what we say ought not to be done. And that is, do not congregate. I know you have a congregation, and some people believe that they have a pipeline to heaven and God knows them personally. But that is not going to save you from the virus. Whether you are in church or at a bar or in wherever you are, if you are congregating, you will be giving us no chance to escape the ravages of the virus. And I simply want to tell such persons that history has shown during the Great Plague that when we went to analyze after, it was such a devastating plague at the time, killing so many people, because people did not understand that you need to separate yourselves in this situation. They all went to church to pray. And by congregating in such large numbers, the plague was able to move very quickly and very easily from one person to another. So a bad situation was made 10 times worse. So while we all will do contact with our superior beings, whether it's in the church, in the mosque, in the mandir, let us not congregate. Because that is what the virus would like us to do. Isolate, separate, be responsible. And we, as part of the international economy, this morning we received some not so good news. Methanex, one of our largest producers in Trinidad and Tobago at Point Lisas, they have two plants, the Titan plant and the Atlas plant. Methanex, taking a decision from outside of Trinidad and Tobago, has taken the decision to temporarily, I hope, shut down one of their two plants in Trinidad and one of their plants in Chile. This is as a direct result of the international marketplace having no space for what is being produced by these plants. The marketplace is saturated. So this is the kind of effect. You know, that would mean, well, I don't know, the jobs are at stake. It will also mean that the support services are not going to be there. The earnings are not going to be there. The Minister of Finance is not going to expect any taxes because nothing is being produced from that plant. And those are the kinds of knock-on. And that is what we are facing. That's what the world economy is facing. And this is the time that we are in. So I want to stop now. If you have any immediate questions while I'm standing here, you can put it to me now, and I'll take about 3 or 4 questions before I sit, and then we'll have the Ministry of Health take over, because this is the Ministry of Health's issue, and we want to hear from them very quickly to brief us. Anthony.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. Could you please clarify your statement about bars are to be closed? Is it only bars or bars and restaurants?
Well, we are not asking restaurants to close if they can conduct business by sending food out. Curbside service, but no in-house dining. So, you know, in Trinidad and Tobago, you won't see a sign saying rum shop. You will see bar and lounge, and you will see beer garden. Well, we want them all to close, because if they remain open, especially now that we are closing schools and so on, they will attract people to congregate. And let us not lose sight of what the objective of all of this is. The objective is not to congregate. So congregating to lime and to drink some beers with your partner by the rum shop is exactly what we don't want.
So is that moral suasion, or is that going to be
well, that is the solution that is put forward. If it requires to be legislated, we will. If it can be enforced under the existing legislation, it will be. But people of Trinidad and Tobago, why do we have to be beaten over the head to do the common sense thing to save our lives? And this is for a short period of time, 14 days, because the biology of it says, the logic of it is, if during that 14-day period, we don't allow the virus to jump from person to person, those persons who have had it 14 days and are now after not able to transmit, what in effect we are aiming to do, as far as we are able to, is to create a semi-sterile environment. Am I correct, Doc? Yes. Good. That's what we're trying to do. So as we're trying to do that, don't make it difficult for us or impossible for us by congregating and making the virus smile. Without the congregation, without contact from person A to person B, the virus will lose its ability to continue to survive as an infector and create the environment that we are in.
Mr. Prime Minister, is there a postponement of the C exams because it's due on April the 2nd?
The Education Committee will respond to that within the, but by Wednesday we'll have this, they will look at all sides of it and determine whether, because exams are an offshoot of going to school. Right? The exams are part of the school operations. So if we've shut down the school operations, it may be that we can make alternative arrangements for, but I don't want to answer to that just yet. Let us see what is the best operation available to us after those who are involved tell us what the best advice is, given that the fact that we now are in it as against thinking about it 6 months ago.
With regard to the people on board the vessel, the nationals trapped, well, not trapped, but they're unable to be brought home on board the cruise liner. What assurance can we give to relatives? They're wondering when. You said they are going to be brought home. What still needs to be done?
The Minister of National Security will respond to that, because this is a specific situation that is being observed for national security. But the one thing I wanted to mention is that these people, if they find transport to get home, they are home, right? And that's why we've kept Caribbean Airlines flying for nationals of Trinidad and Tobago if they are able to get there. I'm not even sure, but Mr. Young will talk to that later on. Let me just take one more question before I sit.
Yes, Rashad Kamladian Media. So just to circle back to the point about bars, right? So the whole point of that, and I understand, is to avoid people congregating. But would we see this measure extended to other industries? Because, I mean, for instance, cinemas and all these other things.
Well, cinemas, I would think that by its very nature in a cinema, you see, I don't want to pick on particular kinds of business. I want to emphasize what the objective is. If cinemas are places where you have to sit close to one another to watch a movie, is it important to watch a movie in this 14-day period? Is it? Or is it more important for us to try and create this sterile national environment? And bars are by their very nature a place where people go to relax and just while the hours away, while they sip on a beer. Is that absolutely essential given what we are required to do? You understand what I'm saying? It will have a certain kind of cultural rub, but we are called upon not to do something like that because the consequences can be grave. And if you don't believe me, look at other people's consequences and ask yourself, up to today, what we can say is there, but for the grace of God, go Trinidad and Tobago. Because what is happening to other countries? Let's take Italy, for those of us who are familiar with Italy. What we call the developed world. Italy had as good a health system as you could think about. As a matter of fact, only 2 or 3 weeks ago, in monitoring the US primary elections, one person was using Italy as an example of a health system that the US should copy. Look at what happened in 2 weeks. In northern Italy, in Milan and around, it has been overwhelmed by the virus. So even if you had a good system, a perfect system, I know there are those in Trinidad and Tobago who believe that our system is the worst. I can tell you, our system is as good as many and better than most in Trinidad and Tobago. And we are lucky that we have in our population some of the best healthcare givers, and we are now putting that as a strength. That is part of our strength. Because from the authorities that we interact with, one of the great fears that they have is if this virus gets into some countries that have the kinds of health system that we know they don't have. You know? So this is a very, very serious thing, and we just have to put ourselves in a situation to respond most sensibly. And we're not being called upon to invent a new wheel. Eh? We only have to look at others and see what the outcome was there based on what they have done and choose a path. We have chosen the path that we chose from the very beginning, which is to be very proactive, be upfront. You may recall when the Minister of Health first spoke about responding to this virus, we were ahead of WHO directives because we said we are going to do more because we really can't expose ourselves to the outcome. It has come to pass that we have been exposed and we are going to be exposed because this is what Trinidad and Tobago is. We're not North Korea, right? We are Trinidad and Tobago. We have 100,000 people in Brooklyn. We don't know how many are going to want to come here. Our nationals, they're all over North America. We can't tell them don't come home. At least we can suggest that you shelter in place. As we are saying to our nationals at home, do not travel now. Now is not a good time to travel. Right? If you're traveling to Tobago, the Ministry of Works are making special arrangements that the ferry will travel. Right? But when it travels, we want to minimize the opportunity for the virus to propagate. Right? And we are calling on our people at all stations to be responsible and use your social conscience.
Prime Minister, can you say how immediate is the border closure?
Tomorrow at midnight. The airline, tomorrow at midnight. That gives them an opportunity to wind down what they're doing now and what's in the pipeline. So after tomorrow at midnight, that kicks in. I said 4 questions. Let me give the minister. I'll come back to you after. I'll come back. I'm staying right here. I'll come back. But I want the conversation to continue with the Ministry of Health, right? So I'll pass the podium.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Good afternoon to the ladies and the listeners. I'm not going to repeat. I need to clarify and amplify in dealing with the health response for COVID called flattening the curve. Before that became a term, that is what we were doing and preparing for. And let me explain what it means. If we did not take the strong action that we took starting from January 30th with the travel restrictions for China, what you would have had by now in Trinidad is a total explosion in the number of cases, and your health system would have been overwhelmed. In other words, we would have been climbing Mount Everest with no oxygen. We'd have been climbing a peak. What we have done, this bought us a month and a half of time, so that right now, instead of climbing Mount Everest with no oxygen, we are now climbing the central range. It's flatter, it's more even, and we are able to cope. That is called flattening the curve. Because if we did not do that and give us time at the ministry, because I'm responsible for policy, strategy, and resource allocation, and set up a parallel health system from January 30th to now, it means our current health system would have been overburdened. What we have done with that time has been able now to identify Covert, operationalize Covert as of Friday gone. Our first set of patients went in there and built capacity at Cora. It has also allowed us, because I gave instructions to UDCOT over the weekend, to reprogram the way work in a REMA is being done. So instead of going on with a REMA for a nice ribbon cutting ceremony with the Prime Minister and everything looks nice, a REMA has been reprogrammed to give me beds. As we sit now, a REMA now has the capacity to give me 77 extra beds. So I have 82 at Covert right now. I have 48 at Cora right now. I will have 77 at a REMA within 24 to 48 hours, with more coming on stream. And if need be, the Minister of National Security will give me 50 beds at Napa, because as you know, Napa has a hotel there. So we have in the pipeline close to 300 beds we could utilize within the shortest period of time. Because as the Prime Minister said, what you don't have is what happened in Italy. In Italy right now, because the hospital system has collapsed, you now have pregnant women who cannot get a hospital bed to give birth. That is the consequence of what happens when you don't flatten the curve. You climb Mount Everest without oxygen. So we worked proactively since January 30th, so we have capacity. You will ask the question, the persons that we have to bring back, and Minister Young will speak about that mechanism. What I will speak to is the capacity of the healthcare system to deal with that sudden influx of 77 odd persons. We have already earmarked 40 beds in Cora and 40 beds in Covert. So we could absorb that without interfering with the national health system. That is what flattening the curve means. Before it became a thing, we have been planning for that. So that is what we are doing at the national level in allocating resources. I want to turn to the issue of testing. And there's a lot of, rightly so, misinformation about testing. There's a good article in the Newsday today, I think, which talks about one village where we have one of the persons who has tested positive, that the whole village now is calling to be tested. And I could understand the anxiety. The anxiety is understandable. But let's talk the science behind testing and why we just don't rush out and test everyone. If you are asymptomatic, that is, you don't present with any of the typical symptoms of COVID, which are fever, shortness of breath, or any of the other symptoms of COVID, and we test you now, you will not have enough of the virus in your system to give you a viable sample to get a true positive test. What you will get is called a false negative. False negative because you may have the virus, but you don't have enough in your system to get a load, and you get a false negative test when you are in fact carrying it. A false negative test gives that person a false sense of security, that I am free from the virus and I will go about in the community, interact, take it home with my grandparents, and infect a whole community. So that is the science behind testing. You start to test from the onset of symptoms when the virus has multiplied enough in your system to give you a sample. Just for a layperson's comfort, let me explain briefly how the virus works. The virus comes in through your nose, through your mouth. It gets into your individual cells in the body. And pretend that each cell has a photocopier machine. What the virus does, it takes over that photocopy machine and spits out copies. 1,000 copies, 10,000 copies. And then each copy goes into another cell in your body, switches on the photocopy machine, and switches on and just prints copies. That is our virus thing.
Before we print anymore, I would like the doctors.
Do you want to do that? Right.
Let the doctors tell us what
Good.
the virus is, because I don't want anybody to say that the cabinet has a virus. I'm anxiously waiting to hear. I'm anxiously waiting to hear from Dr. Ashram and Dr.
So we are not going to be testing healthy people with no symptoms. As far as testing is concerned, that is the domain of CARFA. And I want to reiterate, because there's a lot of public and political mischief. The results we get for positive tests and negative tests come from CARFA. CARFA is not under the control of the PNM or the UNC. So the reports coming out of political entities that we have more cases than we are making available is absolutely false. I spoke with Dr. Joyce St. John last night. We currently have 3,000 test kits in Trinidad and Tobago, which is more than enough, and we have a few thousand more coming in. So as far as resource allocation, we have the bed capacity, we have the ICU capacity, we have the testing capacity. What we need now is the capacity of the individual to rise to the occasion and join with the government, join with the Ministry of Health, and show the world that we have the capacity to behave responsibly. Thank you very much.
Status of COVID-19 in Trinidad and Tobago. At present, we have 4 cases of COVID-19. One of the cases I am very happy to report, who is critically ill, has been consistently improving. Our other 3 cases are mild cases, and they are all doing well and improving. I want to give a quick overview of the coronavirus. The coronavirus can cause a flu-like illness. In most cases, people will recover from the flu-like illness. It can gain access into our systems and cause disease that we manifest as fever, cough, difficulty in breathing by way of mechanisms that are not quite known. Hence the fluidity of the disease. What we do know and what we absolutely need to practice is we know that the virus has to find some way to get from the outside to the inside. So if we are able to get rid of the virus from the outside, in particular from our hands, they won't make their way on the inside. So it's critical that we get the virus off of our hands by way of sanitization, sanitizing our hands, or washing our hands, and that we decrease spreading it by not touching with our hands areas that it can get into. Our face, and by reflex, we touch our face a lot. So we have to make a conscious effort to wash our hands, sanitize our hands, and not touch our faces as much as possible. We also have to make a conscious effort to separate ourselves, because we know with distance, it is more difficult for the virus to gain access. So that when we sit, we don't want to sit too close together. And that has to be extended into how many people should be together at the same time. I want to commend our Honorable Prime Minister, because when you do the reading, it has been so difficult for people to characterize and quantify what a mass gathering is. You just check the literature and see. Even on WHO and CDC, it's difficult. We have clarity, as it is with the rest of our healthcare systems and policies. We are clear as to what a mass gathering is. Simply a number of more than 25. But take that a little bit further. And even if it's not 25, but it's 50 and it's in a small area, then make the adjustment. So as mentioned before, we can't give you all of the areas not to be, all of the circumstances not to be in. We have to also use common sense to apply it. We also have to find a way to communicate and spread that message to all of us. As you know, I am not part of the social media platform, but I have heard of the amounts that are on the social media platform. If that's the way you communicate, that's good, but practice it. Don't just say it, practice it. The point about testing, I have to reiterate. It is important for us to look at our overall resources, as echoed by the Honorable Prime Minister. And we have to be guided by when it makes most sense to test to get the result that makes a difference. So what you will find is, as you interact, if you have to, directly with our frontline caregivers, we will make the decision as to who will be tested. And that is going on with a multidisciplinary team that will make the decision case by case. It's reviewed by a respiratory specialist, by a infectious disease specialist. So people who have to do with breathing, people who have to do with bugs, and as the case needs involves any other specialty that might be needed. So if there's a pregnant person, policies are there, and so on and so on. And we will then make the decisions as to who will be tested. So indeed, everyone may not be tested, because everyone does not need to be tested. And if we do that, we will be using up tests that we don't need to use. So in summary, we are dealing extremely effectively with COVID-19. We, as the healthcare providers, are ready with the systems that we have in place to take care of COVID-19. I feel very comfortable with the support that has been given from all ends. What I do want to see is a rise in the commitment from society. This has to be an individual decision, a family decision, a community decision, and a nationwide decision. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Honorable Prime Minister, Ministers, members of Dr. Trotman. The Prime Minister would have spoken very well about the public health aspects as well. What the decision of Cabinet, the decisions taken today, has given us as a nation and as a Ministry of Health is a fighting chance in this battle against COVID-19. The decisions that we have taken, the cases that we have so far, we have 4 imported cases. They have come into the country through the air bridge, all of them. And this decision today decreases the risk of us getting further cases coming into the country. Closing the schools, and I mean, we have spoken at length about the congregation. Basically, from the ministry's perspective, beyond congregation, I want to take it a little further. Dr. Trotman would have spoken about hand washing. We have all spoken about not touching our faces, sanitizing our hands. To this morning, we would have had a Ministry of Health person visit the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce for a large event. And I want to speak to private sector, and I think private sector needs to get involved at this point. What we have seen done well in other countries that are doing well with the COVID, it's really sanitization of your public spaces. Of course, avoiding congregations, but sanitization is extremely important. The droplet actually lands on hard surfaces, which we call fomites, and they can spread very quickly between one person and the next once you contact your hands. So we have seen some supermarkets take the positive decisions to actually have hand sanitizing stations put throughout their establishments. They are sanitizing their trolleys. They are making sure people actually get it. I saw one individual standing outside the supermarkets distributing into person's hand the sanitizing agent. We see in Singapore the wiping down of all surfaces in any exposed surface with sanitization. And when we speak of sanitization, we can use simple solutions like 1/3 cup of bleach to 1 gallon of water. We're not necessarily talking about an expensive cloth. So we have to do the very basic things very well, but most importantly, as a society, as an individual, we have to take personal responsibility. So all the decisions, all the good decisions we have taken as a cabinet and as a government of Trinidad and Tobago will be to naught if all of us are irresponsible and continue to congregate, continue to not wash our hands, continue to not sanitize. We all have to take responsibility together to avoid COVID-19 becoming the crisis that we have seen in other parts of the world.
Thank you very much, doctors. Ladies and gentlemen, brief messages for us in our continuing communication with you, the national community. And it's really to build immediately on what but if they are not applied by individuals, we will not get the fighting chance that we have been we have been fortunate so far to get, and that is exactly the point that the doctors are making to us today. National security is prepared to act. We have been preparing for this, working as support to the Ministry of Health, and we will continue to do so. One of the issues that the Prime Minister raised with us this morning, and one of the decisions he's told the community about, is non-nationals coming into Trinidad and Tobago after midnight tomorrow. We will not be permitting non-nationals into Trinidad and Tobago after midnight tomorrow. That includes by yachts and by boats, unless there's been an exemption granted by me as the Minister of National Security after consultation with the Minister of Health and the medical experts that I've been in close contact with over the last few days. This immediately increases our fighting chance. When we say nationals, it includes citizens, obviously, as well as those with permanent residency. However, well, not however, what I'd like to add to that is persons need to tell us where they're coming from. All right, so just because you're a national and you arrive here, yes, you have a right of entrance, but our health protocols will kick into place. So to get to the example that has been raised by the media of these 74 nationals or 75 nationals that are currently, as we understand it, in Guadeloupe or Martinique, they began having contact with me since Friday last. Of course, the jurisdiction for them coming off the cruise ship that they are currently on lies with the French government. The French government will take decisions as to whether to allow them to disembark this cruise ship, where we understand there have been certain cases of COVID found on the ship. We are prepared in Trinidad to take control of this situation once these nationals arrive here in Trinidad. Those preparations are already in place. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Health medical personnel who worked overnight along with the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force to ensure that we are prepared to deal with these individuals. We have also found a number of other persons attempting to make their way back to Trinidad who are at high risk of having been exposed to situations where they may be carriers. We are asking persons to be personally responsible and not expose themselves to others, thereby increasing the risk and the likelihood of transmission. Just to also touch, so before I leave that point, this will include yachties, as we currently call them in Trinidad, as we refer to them in Trinidad and Tobago. So the pleasure craft and non-nationals who may have pleasure craft, we will not be permitting you into Trinidad and Tobago. This, of course, also includes the boats that may come in from South America, etc. They are not going to be permitted. So our ports at Cedrus and all of these other legal ports of entry will be instructed not to allow persons in. Only our nationals, which at this stage are citizens and residents, subject to exemptions, because there will be exemptions we need to look at, and I'll do so after consultation with the Minister of Health and the medical experts. The bars and the restaurants, as you've heard the Prime Minister say, the bars we are asking to shut for 14 days. The reason for that, as the Prime Minister articulated, is obvious. We want to stop the contact contamination potential. Restaurants, we are asking you to, if you wish, introduce curbside collection, because we don't want persons gathering. On the point of gathering of persons over 25, we will be looking to enforce that. But as the Prime Minister said, don't let it come down to an enforcement situation. If everyone is personally responsible and you don't find yourselves in those situations, you would have cut the spread and kept us below the curve that Minister Dial Singh is speaking about. This is the only way that countries in the world have been successful in stopping this thing from exploding. So the Ministry of National Security will continue to do what it needs to support these efforts. I'd like to thank all of the frontline workers, the nurses, the medical personnel who are working overtime, and to assure the population that national security is preparing, and we will continue, as we've always done, to be responsive in these situations. One point I've been asked to touch on is the Tobago point the Prime Minister was referring to. In our discussions this morning, the Minister of Works and his team are looking at the ferry service and that social distancing that we've talked about, the ferry will continue to run. The aircraft is a different conversation that we will have with Cal. These are all very fluid instances, but you want to have that social distancing to prevent the contact contamination. Things that have been asked of me are things like gyms and casinos as well. Again, use that 25 number, but also to be responsible. I would like to suggest that the business places take the decision to close for the next 14 days, because these really are the decisions that are going to stop the spread and the explosion of this virus over the next 14 days. National security, I give the assurance, continue to stand by. Yeah, and well, Ministry of Works will come back to the Cabinet with their recommendations. But what they're looking at is a reduction, obviously, in the number of passengers on the ferries and increasing the amount of ferry passages, sailings a day. So this is what the government is doing from a responsible point of view. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a very quick summary of the immediate financial implications on our revenue as a result of two shocks that I experienced. Firstly, an oil price collapse, and then secondly, an oil price collapse, and secondly, the slowdown in business activity. That's the best way I could describe it. Thank you very much. It is on. Okay. So we have two problems facing us now. Collapse of commodity prices and the slowdown in business that will naturally come from the precautions being taken to deal with the pandemic. You can go to the next slide now. This gives you an idea of what has happened to the commodity that is the main source of our revenue in Trinidad and Tobago, natural gas. It declined to 3.3 billion standard cubic feet in 2017. And then through a number of measures taken by the government, it climbed back up to 3.6 billion standard cubic feet, and now leveling off at about 3.55 billion standard cubic feet. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of the problems we face. The red line is the budgeted natural gas price. The blue line is the actual natural gas price. As you can see, we are going fairly well until this year, when we budgeted at $3, coming out of the $3.15 actual in 2018, and the actual we are now receiving is somewhere between $1.70 and $1.80 per MMBTU. So this represents a substantial drop in revenue, and that's gas. Let's go to oil now. This is what has been happening to our oil production as a result of natural decline in our fields, which are all very old and very mature fields. From 80,000, consistent decline down to 55,000 as of this month, 55,000 barrels per day. So consistent decline in oil production. Next slide, please. And this is what is happening with prices. Oil prices collapsed in 2016. This is an average price of $43. It actually went down to 26. That was its lowest level, but averaged out $43 because it recovered quite quickly. Then began to climb, $50 in 2017, almost $65 in 2018, and then there's been a fairly slow decline after that, 18 to 20, 65 to 57 to 51, and then a dramatic collapse over the last 2 weeks. In fact, between January of this year and today, the price of oil has cut by half. So this is what has happened to the price of oil. I checked it just before I came in. It's around 30, 29, 90, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. This is what this is doing to the economy. The orange or red line above is expenditure. So you will see there was a high of almost $63 billion in, well, the years are not in, but this is the year 2014, a high. And then in 2015, 60 billion, 2016, 53 billion, 2017, 49 billion, consistently coming down. We had to adjust to cope with the decline in revenue, coming down to 48. And then as revenue began to climb again, the blue line is revenue. So in 2014, and I will correct the axis when you all get this, in 2014, revenue was 58.4. 2015, 57.2. 2016, 45. But look at this. 2017 is when we really got the effects of the oil price collapse of 2016, 36 billion. Then it started to climb again through a number of things. Gas production began to go up. We improved the taxation regime for the energy sector. We made some adjustments to the other taxation regime. Started to climb, 36 to 43 to 46, and we had projected 47.7 billion for this year. Down below here, the gray line is the budget deficit. You will see a large deficit in 2016, and then we began to contain it, getting smaller and smaller. But look at what has happened. Based on our calculations so far, in terms of what has happened to oil prices and gas prices, we expect to lose 4.5 billion. This has changed between last week and this week. We now expect to lose $4.5 billion. And if I put up the next slide, this gives you an idea of how, this was the 3.5 I spoke about, but then when you factor in green fund, an unemployment levy, another billion goes. We lose $1 billion, so we're now at 4.5. This takes minus 4.5. This takes no account of the slowdown in business activity and the natural decline in activity that will take place as a result of the precautions that other honorable members have spoken about. If I have to make my best estimate of what will happen, we will lose over $5 billion in revenue this year as a result of the oil price shock and also the issues arising from the precautions taken from with respect to the virus. Thank you. I'll answer questions from the floor. You can take them.
Members of the media, the Minister of Finance, and based on one of the just to clarify, we will of course continue to allow cargo ship to all of the protocols that we will be advised of by the Ministry of Health that we have already begun to discuss. So, for example, no disembarkation of crew and these types of things, because we are always going to be driven by the health experts, and they will guide us with the decisions. Thank you.
I think we've got the inputs from the doctors all and others. And now if there are any further questions on the subjects that we've mentioned, we can resume that. Anthony, you were anxiously with the question there.
So actually I'm quite interested in the Chief Medical Officer saying that all 4 of the cases thus far have been imported cases. So I would like to get some clarification on that. And I'd also like to point out that only the first case was there any detail with regard to age and gender and the 3 other cases there's been no detail. He came in last week Monday, he was away for 7 days. If the incubation period is 14 days, might he not have developed the coronavirus in Trinidad and not in Switzerland, as the reference to imported cases would suggest?
So basically we had, prior to the first case, we had no cases confirmed in Trinidad and Tobago. So in saying that, basically there's little or no chance that we would have had someone in this country that had a COVID positive. Imported cases, so once a country has no confirmed cases, the only way you can get a case is if you bring them in, if you import them. The first case came from Switzerland, as you said. The incubation period is from your time of exposure to the time of development of symptoms. That's 14 days. So he would have left Switzerland, come to Trinidad, and spent, I think, 1 day, developed symptoms. He came on the Monday, he developed symptoms on the Tuesday. Well within the 14-day window, he would have actually been in contact with an ill person whilst away in Switzerland as well, which was confirmed. So evidently, from an epidemiological standpoint, it is definitely imported in that case. All other cases would have had travel within the 14-day period from other jurisdictions. And again, we would have deemed them imported based on the epidemiological risk and the lack of exposure in the country, having no cases prior to the first case.
Follow-up. 3 of the Jamaican cases, I think Jamaica now has 15 confirmed.
Right.
3 of them have, according to the Jamaican sources, traveled to Trinidad and Tobago. 2 last week and 1 last night.
So they would have passed through Trinidad, as far as I know. So there would have been 2 in particular that emanated from Malaysia via London, Trinidad, and then onwards to Jamaica. The point of contact, as far as we're concerned, is out of Trinidad. Would not have been in Trinidad, but they mentioned Trinidad as a place that we would have transited through. So the contact, in our view, having only 1 imported case at a time, would have been outside of Trinidad.
Dr. Parasram, Alleyne Media. For the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th case, do you know offhand which country did they come in from? What flight did they take? That kind of.
I want to take you back a little bit to when the CMO for one of the areas in Canada would have implicated Trinidad and Tobago early on by calling Trinidad and Tobago's name in terms of a person emanating from Trinidad and Tobago, implying that they would have imported it from that country. And the responsible thing at this point, we have to take it that most countries in the world have cases. The important thing is that CMOs and countries are not blaming each other for importation. And we have taken a conscious decision to not name countries, our CARICOM neighbors, when we actually are saying somebody's imported. So we are saying it's imported based on the epidemiological evidence that is before us. We think at this point, everyone in the international community needs to understand that COVID
able to
We are talking about significant exposure, meaning your close contacts, your relatives, people that you would have been in a individual can have contacts if for a protracted period of time for up to 100. Ensure that there's no traced all the contacts Up to this point, we have initial contacts.
Okay.
There was community transmission at an early stage. The first 6 countries, anyone coming national from those countries would have been put quite large number of people that we have in it. So we can give you all an idea. Done.
Okay, has been done. Has any of these people who
no. Yes, of course. They have a potential risk of exposure, primary con.
Question. Yeah, Minister.
Comes down to social individual responsibility. So we never learning centers, including private, right? What we're talking about is non-essentials, casinos. People have been asking about cinemas and these types of things. Understand that the next 14 days are critical in terms of us containing the spread and the contact environment. When you're in groceries, this is something we discussed at length under the leadership of the Prime Minister on the advice of the Minister of Health. You just keep distances. You have to do groceries, but take your precautions. As you hear Dr. Trotman, Dr. Parasaram repeating to us, wash your hands. So these are the things, and it comes down to each individual at the end of the day. Thank you.
Prime Minister, I did receive in my email a statement from the opposition leader saying that she has written to you seeking a bipartisan meeting between government and opposition members. Have you received that letter? The opposition leader tried to say this.
Your mic, Prime Minister.
I want to get it clear from the opposition leader.
That's the statement that we've got. The opposition leader has written to you seeking a bipartisan meeting.
Is the same one that voted in the parliament that I shouldn't speak to you? On COVID?
Reading from the email.
Yeah, but I'm saying, is it the same opposition leader? On Friday, I tried to speak to you, the population, about this same issue. And the opposition leader led her crew to vote against the Prime Minister talking to the country in this emergency. Is that the same one who's writing me now? To tell me what?
The opposition leader of Tobago has written to you. The question is, if you have received said letter and if you would be willing to have that meeting.
I am not prepared to take part in any political grandstanding. Right now I have a serious headache. I am prepared to work with any and everybody in this country who is prepared to act in the interest of people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I don't want you to separate the opposition leader from the rest of the country. As Prime Minister, I am prepared to work with any and everybody. In fact, I'm opening my arms to the rest of the country, and I said so from a platform, from a podium. We are in this together. Let's work with it together. We are going to come out of this together, whatever it is. In the case of the opposition leader, who makes a career of irresponsibility and undermining this country's effort at every turn, if she's prepared now to be responsible and to work with the government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, then I say we're making some progress. I have just issued a statement before we came here. I sent a letter which I wrote 1 o'clock this morning about the opposition leader's behavior. I traveled to Ghana from the 1st of March, picking up Trinidad and Tobago Ghana relations, where that same opposition leader, when she was Prime Minister, she broke it down and denied us access to investment in Ghana. shut down a door that was opened to us by the people of Ghana. I went on that trip and spent most of my time recreating that and making serious decisions between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the government of Ghana. You know what she did? As we came away from Ghana saying we have removed uncertainty, and we have now established certainty with dates and deadline for documents to come to Trinidad and to go to Ghana, and we are aiming to sign a contract by July 1st to put Trinidad and Tobago in a position to benefit from investments in Ghana. We lost phase 1 of the gas processing business, and we lost the pipeline business that the Ghanaians wanted to give to Trinidad and Tobago. She caused us to lose that. I go out there again last week and got phase 2 committed to us. You know what she did? She got herself quoted in the Ghanaian media saying, ignore the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago because nothing that he said could ever come to pass. You know what that has done? Created uncertainty again for the Ghanaians in dealing with Trinidad and Tobago. So NGC and our other companies that may be having an opportunity to make serious investment for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, billion-dollar investments for serious earnings. We have our largest banks in Ghana. Our largest bank, Republic Bank, as a frontline bank in Ghana now. We want to grow that business, to grow our economy outside of Trinidad and Tobago. That is diversification that we are after in the financial sector. You know what she has done by that stupid statement? Create uncertainty in Ghana with the treatment of that bank and our business. Because they say, if the opposition leader is saying so again, is it that what we are entering now is a waste of time? Because suppose she wins the next election. All that we are doing now to grow our business and open doors for the NGC. As a matter of fact, the NGC is now requiring more than ever to go vertically integrated, to stop being only a gas aggregator in Trinidad and Tobago, but to get into the business deeper. And we are only that big in Trinidad and Tobago. We look outside as the bank has done and found opportunities. Today, Republic Bank is the spearhead of our growth in West Africa. And what does the opposition leader do? Stay in Trinidad and Tobago and send statements that go worldwide, disparaging a situation where Trinidad and Tobago was the first country that was ever invited to be the guest of honor at the Ghanaian independence after 63 years. So instead of standing with us as a people when we are having proud moments and making way, you're telling me about, you want to, and writing me and telling me what now? To tell me what now? Friday you were voting in the parliament that the Prime Minister must not speak to the country. Playing politics. And I tell you something else too. We have some citizens who are on Facebook exposing the nasty underbelly of this country, of racism and politics in every single thing. We are not going to come out of this problem following their model. I'm appealing to the people of Trinidad and Tobago to say that we are better than that. And this is not a joke. This is a serious situation. This is life and death, and I'm not playing games. If there are people in the opposition who can make serious contributions to what we are doing here now, and I welcome them. But Mrs. Prasad Bisesa is not one of them. She is the leader. Go and look at her behavior in the parliament last Friday, encouraging her members to vote no, that the Prime Minister mustn't talk to the country in a life and death situation on COVID-19. And then now, she wrote me, I haven't seen the letter, I haven't read the letter yet, but she's telling you in the media, playing games. I have no time for games. I have serious business to do for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And the government will take responsibility and will work with any and everybody who's willing to work. We are all in this together.
This Prime Minister, the announcement you made concerning...
There is always a role for the opposition, but I'm saying the record has shown that they have not assumed their role of responsibility. They prefer the role of underminers. But if they want to change and being led to change and work with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, as we are being called upon to do now, my arms are open and the government is prepared to work with every one of them.
This is you spoke about, in terms of the issue of job losses, the closure of, let's say, bars and so on, is the government looking at a fund of some kind to help those...
That is precisely what I said earlier on, that there are going to be people who are going to be directly affected and deprived of a livelihood or even a meal. And that's why the Minister of Finance, in this very difficult situation, will have to take on some responsibility to get sustenance to those persons, and you'll be told about that within 72 hours.
Also, you did describe this as a crisis and an emergency.
And that's what it is.
In your deliberations so far, has the issue of a curfew or state of emergency been...
No. That is not part of the solution. We are taking actions that are not required to be described in the context of a state of emergency. We are not in a state of emergency. We are in an emergency which we are dealing with outside of the legal term of a state of emergency. Right? For example, a state of emergency can make you wash your hand. Yes, the lady behind the minister.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Covert from the Newsday. Three very quick questions. First of all, probably Minister of Finance probably better to answer. Do you have any idea of how much we might have to dip into the HSF?
We will do what has to be done in the most responsible way, because I tell you one thing, you may not agree, but one thing this country has going for it is that there's a responsible government in Trinidad and Tobago looking after the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We will do what has to be done using what strengths we have, and let the strengths work for us to negate the weaknesses, because there are significant weaknesses. We are not, in this situation, we've given health #1 priority. If we have money in hand, we will try and ensure that what is required to get the health situation under control, to preserve the operations of our healthcare givers, to make sure that our hospitals, our infrastructure is in place, and try and take decisions like we've taken today and will take tomorrow to ensure that we are not overwhelmed by the virus.
Okay, so just to clarify, we don't have like a general figure just yet. Also, we're not immediately planning to dip into the HSF, even though it's the rainy day fund.
I just said, but you're not listening to me. I said the Attorney General may have to make adjustments to the law to make sure we could dip into it before October. That's,
okay, all right. No,
because the crisis is with us now. We require the resources now to give relief to everything that we are doing now. We can't postpone it until October, when the current arrangement says that at the end of the fiscal year, that's when you can look at the outturn of the budget and so on. So we will use our resources. I started by telling you that the German Chancellor said she's not focusing, given the nature of the crisis that she has determined to be bigger than the last financial crisis. She is not now being directed and focusing on the budget. And that's what Trinidad and Tobago is now. We cannot be focusing on the budget. What is demanded of us now is respond to what the virus needs to be responded to.
And just to follow up on that, has Trinidad and Tobago made any sort of overtures to any of our international partners? For example, the IMF has a fund available for countries that might need it.
Not yet, but the Minister of Finance has his instructions.
While we were here, we just got word that the Andean Bank of Latin America is making a small contribution to all member states of about the equivalent of $3 million TT dollars, but also making available to every member of CAF $50 million US in emergency immediate funding. So I just got an email to that effect from CAF as we were here at this press conference.
And to answer your question directly, to the extent that there are windows at the IMF, we are available to access any such window. I'm not here talking about the IMF program now. I'm saying if the IMF has assistance windows, we are not only the IMF, the IDB, more than likely, we are members of those institutions. And to the extent that there are support mechanisms there for us, in that way we'll access every single one of them.
But that's not a that's not a loan, right? That's like a grant.
No, well, what we're talking about here is whatever is available. You may find that grants are available in small amounts, loans are available in larger amounts with certain conditions, moratoria, and I'm sure at the World Bank and the IDB and places like that, and the IMF, because this is something that would require those kinds of interventions, because nobody had planned for this. we were going along managing our debt and our expenditure and revenue. Our debt profile was getting a little steep, and then this thing has come upon us. So even so, right? I saw in the papers last week advice from one of the spokespersons for the business community, said that the government shouldn't borrow. I said, well, thank you very much for the advice, because one of the things we were trying to borrow to do was to pay you. So since you advise that we shouldn't borrow, well, I mean, that's one pressure off our shoulder.
Chile News from Newsday. Well, I don't know if Dr. Paraswamy or Mr. Dialson will answer. And there was a case of the person who was found to be infected on a CAL flight from Guyana, who later died. I'm just wondering if those persons on the flight or some of the persons were put into quarantine?
Yes, they were. All the persons that would have come to Trinidad or been exposed, including the persons, the flight attendants and the crew, the rest of the crew, they were put in self-quarantine. So far, of course, as you know, none of them would have developed symptoms.
And this question for Mr. Stewart. Yeah. You mentioned we're going to be closing off our legal borders to boats and yachties and so forth. What about the illegal borders? And I know we have our registration system was put in place, but I'm sure we still have persons trying to come in from Venezuela, which now has...
That is why it is called illegal. The reason why it is called illegal is because they are going where they're not supposed to go.
So
are we increasing patrols?
The answer is yes. Since this is not something that has happened overnight in our planning and preparation, I've asked the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard as well as the Defence Force to focus our resources and our assets down in certain areas where we know that type of activity takes place. We have not seen any increase in attempts, but we are doing all that we can, including we're going to be utilizing the air asset unit that we got up over the carnival weekend. So yes, the answer is obviously we're focusing our air assets on it.
To come back to concluding the question before that one, you mentioned about what the Minister of Finance would do with borrowing. In everything there are two sides. You would have observed that the cost of borrowing has gone down considerably. That provides an opportunity for people like us, Trinidad and Tobago, who are carrying debt, to refinance under the new terms, if those are available. So the Minister of Finance will be looking at that to see whether we can refinance expensive debt for cheap money that might be available now. So that will be part of the operation of the Ministry of Finance. So in all of it, it's not, there are some things that we can come out of it thinking that we have done a little better.
How vulnerable are the socially displaced in this spread of this disease? Are they
very vulnerable.
So what are we doing to kind of, but they may not be as practical as sanitizing?
Well, they pose a particular challenge which would require a particular kind of response. And this is where the private sector and the NGOs can help, but the government, through the Ministry of Social Development, will have certain kinds of outreach there. Because it's not about them, it's about all of us. If they are a pool of the virus, then, and of course, they are our citizens.
The issue of mass gatherings, supermarkets across the country have been challenged in terms of people panic buying. Any guidelines or any advice?
Well, we have simply been appealing to the better judgment of our citizens that panic buying will not help. Panic buying will simply worsen the situation. It will deprive persons of what they should normally get because you have taken too much. Right? And it's still a free society. I mean, some people are rationing, some taking the opportunity to ration. We don't think, we are really here in a situation where responsibility at the personal level, as I said earlier on, is playing a major role. If you see 12 on the shelf, don't buy all 12. Because some people who will not get maybe the carrier of the virus that infects a child. You understand what I'm saying? You might have bought up all. And then somebody come after and didn't get any, and they go home in wherever they live. And then they get infected and they spread it. And your well-protected child goes to school or go to wherever you go, and that child is infected, and what would you have done? So let us share the responsibility and share the resources.
Could I just tag on to the legal
entry question.
The illegal entry means national security.
The U.S. government has given the assurance to people illegally in the United States who come forward to that they will not be deported or measures taken against them. What assurances could we give to people who may be here illegally and who have citizens?
At the end of the day, it's not about assurances. Dr. Trotman hit the nail on the head in describing how we have to deal with this situation. There are limited test kits. Whoever presents in that type of situation will obviously have to be facilitated, because as Prime Minister just answered, we are all in this thing together. It doesn't recognize race, nationality, etc. But we are doing what we can at national security to make sure that we perimeter and ring fence who is here in our population to protect against the spread of this virus.
Look at the logistics of this. Huh? If an illegal person is held and you have to detain them, you are detaining them in some kind of prison environment. Now that is the worst place for this virus to start to operate. So far, we have had no reports, but in the prison environment, God forbid, we want to go as far as possible to prevent it from getting in there, because that is the kind of environment in which the virus will have a field day. So then if you're dealing with a person who you have to detain or restrain, then that is a problem for you. So, and then you don't want people to not come forward because they are fearful that they'll be treated in a particular way and then be out there and be a carrier of the virus among law-abiding people. So those are the shapes of the curve.
Prime Minister, this question is directed to the Minister of Health, Mr. Diyal Singh.
Which Minister of Health?
Mr. Diyal Singh.
Oh no, this Minister of Health, right? I thought you wanted a real doctor.
Can you say if the Ministry of Health will utilize private sector ICU beds should the issue worsen, and as well as private sector specialists such as the pulmonologists?
That is always an option if we reach that level, but we are not anywhere near that. We are also readying, let me just explain further, and that's a good question. We are also readying Augustus Long Hospital just in case we need that surge capacity. And as the Prime Minister said, this is the time all hands are on deck. This is not a public sector issue. This is a Trinidad and Tobago issue, and the private physicians have a role to play if and when they are called to do so.
There's only one other aspect of that, and that is that care in a private hospital is very expensive. And if we are thinking about looking at the private hospitals as a major contributor to bed space, we also be automatically talking about huge costs, which we may not be able to afford. So what has been happening in other countries is that they try to create alternative arrangements. For example, in some countries, they use the army to provide field-type hospitals. Right? Those are the kinds of models that you use in Africa during the Ebola crisis. The army went in and created field hospitals on the tents. And then, otherwise, if you try to go to private hospitals with a large number of people who require a long period of hospital care, you're talking about money that may be better spent in another kind of way. So the options are available, and the Ministry of Health will advise the government how best to use the resources in the country.
Prime Minister, the good news to that is that planning has already begun, so our discussions have already begun, and the Defence Force is coming back to us with a report. I was speaking to them last night. We have been looking at that for some time now, exactly what the Prime Minister spoke about.
Okay, I want to thank, I think we can end at this stage. You have one more question?
Mr. Yalsing, I'd just like to touch on, we spoke last week about the hotlines to report cases. Has that been operationalized?
Yeah, thanks. So the hotline should be operational by Wednesday or Thursday, I believe. We have the technology, we have bought the phones, we have developed the questionnaire, because the success or failure of this hotline will depend on the type of triaging you do over the phone. We have hired 10 doctors to man it. They are being trained right now, and we hope to roll it out by about Wednesday or Thursday.
Mr. Alleyne, can you just tell me how many ventilators we have available?
I wouldn't have that number off, but we gave the instruction about 2 weeks ago to buy 15 more. Of that 15 more, I believe 6 are on their way or already here, and the balance will be here shortly. So I am being assured by North Central RHA that we will have enough.
Very quickly, sir, any conversations with the judiciary in terms of its operations, given the number of people that go to courts and so on?
I don't have any specific information about that, except that the underlying objective of us all, don't congregate, applies to the judiciary as well. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I want to particularly thank our 2 doctors who once again came out this morning, Dr. Parasham and Dr. Chotman, and for keeping the conversation alive. And I want to just point out to you, what we have done and what we continue to do is to share with the public all the information that we have, tell you what we know, and notwithstanding our hopes and our fears, let you know what we are into and what we are in for. You would have seen what the Minister of Finance has shown us this morning is not good, but that is our lot, and we have to make the most of it. And I just want to appeal to the national population. There's no need for panic. Panic is the worst state to be in if you are going to respond to this situation or any similar situation. Let us keep a level head, let us be reasonable, and let us be our brother's keepers, and we're going to get over this. Thank you very much.